Hello, Russell Brand. This is The Truth. Donald Trump's President of America now. I wanted to talk to you while everyone's sort of still delirious and in shock about it. We've talked about Donald Trump quite a lot on The Truth because he's like a fascinating media operator. He said such outlandish and offensive things, but is antithetical to our times where politicians seem so groomed and slick, even though in some ways he is both groomed and slick, because he has a sort of a earnestness and a rawness. Take even the first moment of his victory speech where he says, sorry I'm late, complicated business.
Sorry to keep you waiting, complicated business.
He obviously knows that this is taking place in incredible adversity. What I'm fascinated by, though, is the amount of fear and anger that's generated by the victory and how obviously reminiscent it is to Brexit in this country. This, for me, Donald Trump's victory and the decision of Britain to leave Europe point to a phenomenon that I think is really well outlined in an article by a man called Thomas Frank in The Guardian, where he points to the idea that liberalism as a political system is failing so many people that they have lost interest and lost faith. And my own personal feeling about it is that people no longer trust the people that say, hey, we'll look after you, it's okay, stay in Europe, it'll be alright, vote for Hillary Clinton, it's going to be better, because the people that you're talking to are already living in a kind of post-apocalyptic world, for want of a better phrase. You can't tell people that it'll be terrible if we leave Europe, if the world they live in is already terrible. You can't tell people it'll be terrible to have Donald Trump in power if the world they live in is already terrible. They're not susceptible to that kind of threat. And of course I'm aware of the mad things he said about women and the mad things he said about Muslims and the mad things he said about building walls. And what I think is fascinating, that someone can say that and it makes no difference. People still vote for him. How disenchanted, how disillusioned, how disempowered can you be that this seems like a sensible alternative? My interpretation is the only thing they actually cared about is change. That Hillary Clinton, whatever she was offering and whatever she was saying, is a political affiliate of Barack Obama who's already in power. Barack Obama, by the way, who now seems sort of like Christ, doesn't he, compared to the people contesting this election. But let's look at the last 8 years and the kind of things that were happening. And that's why people were disillusioned, because you see, even when there's someone that seems affable and capable, like Barack Obama in the White House, still terrible unrest, still drone killings, still terrible poverty, still no consequences for the people that exploited huge numbers of ordinary Americans through the financial crash. We can't keep responding to events like this with more fear and anger. It's fear and anger that are creating these conditions. There was this yogi whose name I really should learn, who said to Bertrand Russell, when Bertrand Russell was campaigning for nuclear disarmament, he said to him, hold on, what's the point in us getting rid of nuclear weapons if we still have the mindset that created the nuclear weapons? And Bertrand Russell goes, I don't talk about that, let's just get rid of nuclear weapons. You can't blow up a planet with a mindset. But now, 40 years later, 50 years later, we haven't achieved nuclear disarmament. There are more weapons. And the point that yogi was making is the fact that Donald Trump is President of the United States is sort of not what's important. What's important is the conditions have occurred in which Donald Trump becomes. So there's no point reacting to, what? Donald Trump is President of America? Yesterday, the conditions existed for it to happen. So they did 2 days ago, a month ago, a year ago, and for the last 10, 20 years, they've been building towards this moment. And what it is, and what I've always believed, and what I've said very publicly, is the political system doesn't connect with people. People want change. People want to have genuine power. So if someone comes along and says things like, I'll drain the swamp of Washington of all its corrupt lobbyists and affiliates, that's appealing. What my hope is that this victory for this sort of absurd and ludicrous character who has said these outrageous and offensive things, my hope is that we will recognise that we have to provide an alternative. People have to provide an alternative. It's not enough to go, look, here's Hillary Clinton, be grateful, shut up. People have had enough. If the Democrats could put forward Bernie Sanders right now, would they? Of course they would. A person who was talking about socialism, a person who was talking about fairness and justice. So what I've taken from it is that this is a time where we have to, instead of like after Brexit going, those bloody racists Brexited us, you have to go, right, let's try and reach out and understand why people feel like this and be loving and not be presumptuous. And for those of us that are privileged enough not to be that are not in financial trouble, that aren't feeling the weight and the pressure of the world and looking for someone to blame for that, and feeling like that when someone like Donald Trump comes along and in his own easy, accessible, TV-friendly way says it's because of Muslims, Mexicans, that when someone like that comes along, it seems appealing and attractive. We have to create a world where Donald Trump isn't necessary. And if we don't create that kind of world, don't be surprised when Donald Trump becomes president. We've just, for the last 20, 30 years, been creating the conditions where this was, as we now know, inevitable, because it has happened. Now we have to find alternatives. And I don't think it's going to take place on the superficial administrative level of Washington or Westminster politics. It's going to take place philosophically and deeply. We have to change the way we treat each other, change the way we see ourselves, change the way we talk about the world. Significant change, because the people that vote for Brexit, the people that vote for Donald Trump, even if people do think that immigration is the issue, then those of us who don't think that's the issue, we've got a duty, haven't we, to communicate in a way that is understandable, accessible, not condescending and not patronising, why we believe that this is the wrong path for the world. You know, and we're talking to people that don't have an awful lot to lose. So if you do feel afraid and disappointed and angry about it, try not to. Try to feel optimistic, because this had to happen. In the end, we had to reach some kind of sort of climax, some sort of crisis, some kind of nadir where it's no longer possible to continue in the way we have been. What I think the election of Donald Trump means is it's no longer possible to pretend that politics is all right, because look at it. Now look at it. Now you see. As Biggie Smalls would say, if you don't know, now you know. I can't use the next word, not being an African American man or woman. But, you know, those are the sentiments I feel. If Hillary Clinton had become president, she's a person that did have those affiliations with the banks, that does want to go to war in the Middle East and the Yemen, all these things, you know, stuff that I don't know very much about. But what I suspect is we would not have got real change. With Donald Trump, it's no longer possible to ignore that real change is required. That is some true news. Subscribe here if you want to.
Is a tool that is abused to fool you and to leave you scared and confused. Truths is like the news. If the news was true, I want some truths. Let's have some truths.